Welcome, everybody, back to the Friar Talk podcast and YouTube channel. For today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Padres pitching rotation, going to be talking about the starters, going to be talking about the bullpen. Now, if you clicked on the video, you notice that we said the Padres will have a top 5 pitching rotation in baseball. And I think a lot of Padre fans, a lot of MLB fans look at the Padres team from last year and go, okay, this is ridiculous. This is, you guys are being homers. First off, I want to say tomorrow we're going to have an episode out about the Padres lineup. And that one is going to be very, very negative. So this isn't they say, oh, yeah, like the Padres are going to be so good. Woohoo. No, we all believe that the Padres have a very underrated pitching staff. However, we think their lineup is really bad. So you look at the pros, you look at the good things about this team. And I think the first thing that's going to stand out is not only the starting rotation, but adding Ruben Niebla in as your pitching coach. We've talked about him a ton in the past. If this is your first time checking out the channel, we are all super high on bringing Ruben Niebla in. You also have Bob Melvin, who, unlike Jace Tingler, is very good at learning how to use his bullpen pieces. So Padres have a ton of talent when it comes to starters. You have Joe Musgrove likely as your number 1, Yu Darvish as your 2, Blake Snell, Mike Clevenger, and then you have a 3-person competition right now for the 5th spot in Chris Paddock, Nick Martinez, and Mackenzie Gore. So you have a very, very deep rotation. You compare it to last year's rotation, that was the number 1 pitching rotation in baseball for about the first 2 months, and you had at most 3 starters at any point in the season. The rotation was absolutely devastated consistently. There was always someone hurt. Blake Snell struggled a ton. Chris Paddock struggled a ton. This year's going to look a lot different. So you look through this rotation. We'll go through the starters first, and we'll talk about this bullpen after. But how do you guys feel about this starting rotation right now, both compared to last year, but also just compared to the rest of the MLB?
I think it's a very good rotation, especially looking at it right now. You look from top to bottom, it's kind of like the same rotation as last year, except you're adding Mike Clevenger, and you actually have a good competition for a number 5 spot right now. Whereas last year you went into the season with Adrian Morejon as your number 5, and yes, he's a good pitcher. He unfortunately got injured. Then you went in with Ryan Weathers the rest of the year, and had a really great start, but fell off significantly after that. Not his fault though. Just a really young kid who's trying to find his way in the MLB, but a really, really good rotation. Musgrove had his breakout last year, and he's everything that we thought he would be. Fantastic slider, solid fastball. I think he's going to look even better with Ruben Niebla. So nothing much to say about No Joe, first no-hitter in San Diego history. So really excited to see him again. Career 4.02 ERA, but last year threw for 3.18. So I actually expect more of what he did last year than what he did previous years. But I pulled up pretty much all the numbers of these guys, and I think the biggest thing is that we're getting the guy that has the best career ERA back out of this whole rotation. It's Mike Clevenger. Consistently a top 10, top 15 pitcher when he was playing, and I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, how good he is. I know he's coming off of Tommy John, and it could be quite scary, but all he has talked about was how good he felt throughout the process of his recovery, and that's really enlightening news to hear. And so far, it looks like, he went toe-to-toe with Machado. Machado took him deep once, and he struck him out once, so that's a tie. But, everything else has looked good regarding Mike Clevenger, supposedly, his stuff, and he's super excited. I know I keep talking about Niebla, but he's super excited to get back his old someone that helped him down in this journey of becoming one of the best pitchers in baseball, I think. Yu Darvish, I don't know what to expect, man. I think he's gonna have a really good start to the season up until June. I think he's gonna be fantastic, maybe July. It's just gonna be a matter of will injuries start to pile on him again. We brought it up. I think last year we put too much emphasis on the sticky stuff and how much that affected him rather than him having to change his mechanics to accommodate his hip injury. So it's going to be a matter of how will he hold up. I think if he holds up, man, he's going to be maybe not 2020 numbers, but also remember 2020 was a shortened season. So it's 2 straight years where the first 60 to 80 games he looks fantastic. But last year shows that he kind of fell off because of injury. So let's see how he holds up. Blake Snell, I'm expecting a huge bounce back from Blake Snell. I know throughout the season he didn't look very good. It was really only the last month and a half or 2 that he looked fantastic, man. He looked lights out. The minute Larry Rothschild left the organization, he was lights out, man. And it was so fun to see. I always bring up who I have the most fun watching. And when he was successful, it was definitely Yu Darvish. I had brought up that when I'd go to Padre games, I kind of lined it up to where I'd watch Yu Darvish just because it was almost a guaranteed win. So I wanted to leave happy. But right now, I really want to watch Blake Snell because I think he is the most fun, maybe other than Mike Clevenger. I really like Mike, but Blake Snell is a really fun pitcher to watch, man. He's really electric. He's really, exciting. Like, I don't know, man, but when he was throwing those, 8 innings with no hits and he was almost throwing no hitters pretty consistently, it felt like almost a guaranteed win, except the lineup didn't come through. So, it would end up being a loss, unfortunately. But feel really good about this rotation, man. I think it's going to be a top 5 rotation in baseball as long as, and we keep saying this, health permits. This will be a top 5 rotation in baseball. I don't expect Mackenzie Gore to start the season on the major league roster. I think that's going to be Chris Paddock's spot as a 5th starter or Nick Martinez. But with time, as time goes on, Mackenzie Gore will absolutely make his debut this year. Remember, his ETA was supposed to be last year. He's absolutely going to make his debut this year. He's going to make an impact. Making an impact in spring so far, of course, only 5 innings, but he's going to be someone to watch in that Rookie of the Year race by the end of the year, I believe.
And as much as you say as health permits, we have the depth that we didn't have last year. As soon as 2 guys went down, we had to go and sign Vince Velasquez and Jake Arrieta, who were tremendously bad. Jake Arrieta, I think, left the Padres with over a 10 ERA and like 4 starts. It was bad. But now, if, say, 2 guys go down, we still have Martinez and Gore that can come back, not also counting the other guys that we have in like AAA, such as Adrian Martinez, Ethan Elliott, that may be able to come up for a spot start. Ryan Weathers, who could come up for a spot start. You guys have now depth in both the rotation and in the bullpen. We'll get into the bullpen later, but we've seen Paddock. He's starting to develop his curveball a lot more. It was his go-to pitch last year outside of his changeup. But if he can get both of those working on the same level, Paddock will be a just menace as a 5th starter. I mean, he's got his control back. His velocity is the only thing that's somewhat concerning. He usually bounces between, okay, I'm going to hit 97 this game, to, okay, I'm only going to be able to hit 93, 92 consistently. If he can stay consistent with his velocity, he will be golden. We may be able to call him the sheriff again. He will hold down that 5th spot. And even when he wasn't striking out a ton of people last year, he was being beyond efficient with his pitches. He would go into the 6th inning with only like 60 pitches. We need that because last year our pitchers did not go very long. We had a lot of guys go 5 innings. Maybe that changes this year. Maybe got the strike zone more, strike out more people, or just, get batters out more efficiently than we did last year, considering Ruben Niebla is a much better pitching coach than Larry Rothschild. But you have Musgrove or Darvish starting opening day, so you can say one of those two are going to go 1-2. You probably go Clev. Then you go Snell if he's healthy. He still has a little bit of a question mark around him, whether or not he's going to start off the season or be on the IL. Then you have either Paddock or Martinez. And considering Martinez went up against the stacked Dodgers lineup and only gave up 1 run in 3 innings, and it was basically off a, here you go, I'm throwing it down the middle for a strike because it's a 3-0 pitch to Freddie Freeman getting taken the opposite way. He had a decent outing. And then you still have Mackenzie Gore knocking on the gate saying, hey, you know what? I'm back. I am this ace. I'm going to be the future ace of this team. Whether or not you like it, I might be the problem that I'm going to force a 6-man rotation or force my way into that 5th spot this year, which is a great problem to have.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about a lot of these guys. I think the big question marks for me, I would say, are probably how does Mike Clevenger look post-injury? Now, so far, every sign has been he looks like he did before. Chris Paddock, is his velocity able to stay similar? Does his changeup look like it did a couple years ago? Because that was something that with Larry Rothschild, pretty much all of the guys that had their changeup as their number 2 pitch or like their main strikeout pitch had drastic like decreases in performance last year. You look at Blake Snell, you look at Chris Paddock, their changeups were not the pitches that they were in prior seasons. And that's because Larry Rothschild's whole thing is like, let's just throw a bunch of sliders until your elbow falls off. and that absolutely destroyed the Padres last season. But you look at it, and I think a lot of people think Chris Paddock is awful, but I mean, he hasn't had great years. But he's also your 5th starter, and if he doesn't look good, we brought up there's Mackenzie Gore, there's Nick Martinez, and then okay, let's go into the minors. You have Ryan Weathers, Reese Kinnear, Adrian Martinez, Ethan Elliott. You have 4 other guys. The amount of starters on this team is like triple for the majority of what last year was. And that is a legitimate answer. That it is triple. It is 10, 11 guys compared to 3. That is something that I don't think is getting talked about enough. And I know a lot of people really pushing for the Padres to sign or trade for another starter. They have like too many options almost right now. So I think they're going to be fine there. If Yu Darvish can stay healthy, that means so much more because you're going to get a high caliber pitcher there. Joe Musgrove he had a couple bad outings, but I mean, throughout the course of the season, he was extremely consistent last year. So hopefully you're going to get the same thing out of No Joe this year. But the starting rotation looks good. The question has been health, and how do you answer those question marks? You bring in a bunch of depth, and that's what they've done. So we look to the bullpen. Big question with the bullpen. Who's going to be the closer? And that's something that I feel like really gets overvalued when you look at pitching pitching staffs. If you run a closer by committee role and you look at it from a matchup standpoint, typically a lot of those teams do a lot better. The Rays did that for years. The Giants have done that in the past. Teams that do that are very, very successful. So it seems like that's the route that the Padres want to go. I think the big 3 names to close, and there's a 4th name, but I don't really want to bring them up to close because I don't want to see it. But the 3 names I think that should be the most talked about candidates are Robert Suarez, who is just signed, who has got a lot of hype in spring training. And actually his agent reached out to us. He DM'd us on Twitter and said, hey, Robert means business. He's pumped, loved your guys' video because I think we talked about it when he got signed just because it was kind of an underrated move. He's pumped. Like he wants to be that guy. He has the stuff. He throws absolute gas. So he's someone that we should all be really excited about. Pierce Johnson is another guy that has put up a couple years that have been really underrated back to back. He's a very solid pitcher. I don't think he's going to close necessarily, but I do think that he will be a very reliable setup man. And then the other guy is Dinelson Lamet. Dinelson Lamet is healthy, it seems like. It seems like he's going to be ready to go. And if you listen to how Bob Melvin talks about him, he talks about him like he wants him to be an elite closer. So I think that's very, very exciting stuff there. You look through the rest of the bullpen, Emilio Pagan, that was the other guy I wasn't going to bring up for the closer spot. He got completely rocked today. I don't know what you're going to get out of Emilio Pagan, but if he's your 6-inning guy, all right, you can live with that. Craig Stammen coming off of a very good year. Tim Hill was excellent early on in the year last season. And then they threw him about 20 to 30 innings too much, and then he fell apart. What a surprise. Nabil Chrismat was amazing last year. Austin Adams broke the record for hitting guys with pitches. I don't really have a ton of faith in Austin Adams, but I know some people really like him. Ray Kerr was the player that we acquired in the Adam Frazier deal. Ray Kerr is a lefty, throws over 100 miles an hour. Pretty young. I think he's like 27, 26. A lot of people like him. I think that he could definitely be a piece that ends up starting on the opening day roster, especially with 28 spots. And then Steven Wilson's another guy to bring up there. Final guy I'll bring up, Kevin Kopps. Padre fans have been super hyped for this guy. He might not be on the opening day roster, but he was the pitcher of the year? He was something like that, like 2 years ago when he got drafted. He was drafted last season. He's someone that could look really good in the minor leagues because his numbers were ridiculous last season. He could look really good in the minor leagues in AA or AAA, and he might get called up a couple months into the year and then immediately be put into a setup man role. So those are the main guys there. Drew Pomeranz is also a name that should get brought up. Only question with Drew is I'm not going to count Drew in this rotation or in this staff just because it seems like if we get anything out of him, that's a plus because just all of the injuries he's had. So I'm not really counting him in my projections just because of all the injuries he's had. But if you get him back, I mean, we've seen how good Drew Pomeranz is when he's healthy. He's amazing. So bullpen, it might not be the best bullpen in the world, but you have a ton of depth. You can go into the minor leagues and you can get a bunch of guys that are ready to start or ready to come in as bullpen pieces. And when this rotation is healthy, you don't need the Padres bullpen to be, perfect. They're going to get extremely good outings from these starters. So I think they have a recipe. You have Ruben Abel, you have Bob Melvin, you have a manager that actually knows how to utilize his pitchers. And I think that's going to go a long way for this team. And I do think that they're ultimately going to be a top 5 or a top 5 staff in the league.
Yeah, the bullpen was the best bullpen in baseball up until August around the 5th to the 15th, like the 10th or something like that. They were the best bullpen in baseball. And I went ahead and I looked up the projections this year for the starting rotation. Joe Musgrove was projected for a 3.51 ERA. I think that's fair. Mike Clevenger 3.45, Yu Darvish 3.87, Blake Snell 3.67, Martinez 3.79, Paddock 4.05. So I mean, I think Zips is obviously a lot less favorable towards our rotation than we are. I think Musgrove will actually sit around 3.4, 3.5. Clevenger, same. Yu Darvish, that seems like a right projection. I think Blake Snell is actually going to be like 3.4 kind of guy, 3.3. Paddock seems about right. I think a lot of people with Chris Paddock, Matt, I think you brought it up. Like, people think he sucks. I think the thing with Chris Paddock is people hold him to the standard that they held him in 2019, where he's being labeled a phenom. But once you get settled in like I did and realize he will never be that, he'll probably never be that again, and be happy that he's your 5th starter, because ultimately he is a decent 5th starter, and that's all I think he will be as of right now, until unless he does reach his full potential that everyone did think in 2019 he had. I'm okay with that. But I mean, you also brought up the closer options. You brought up how Austin Adams hits way too many guys. If Austin Adams didn't hit as many guys, you could actually make a really, really good case for him to be the closer. He strikes out 31% of his batters, which was the highest mark on the team last year. This year, he's also projected to strike out around 31% of his batters. Or maybe that was projection I saw. But I remember he was really high in terms of K rate. Blake Snell is also projected to strike out 30% of his batters. So, this could be like those kind of guys are definitely going to gather a lot of strikeouts. I think regarding the closer role, the most likely would probably be Garcia or Suarez. Pagan, I know I've brought up he's a closer before, but dear God bless me, do not let him be our closer this year. Who else? I really think Lamet's going to be a really great closer. I know Bob Melvin has talked up Dinelson Lamet a lot, and he got really excited when he was talking about that closer role and talking about Dinelson Lamet. So keep an eye out for him as our closer. The hopes of him throwing 150 innings are definitely gone. Of course, we wish he could be the ace that we all knew he could be, but that won't happen, unfortunately, not this year. But it's nonetheless a really exciting rotation. A lot more depth than there was last year, whereas last year you were kind of relying on a trade and you swung and missed hardcore, and our whole fan base got bamboozled by Ken Rosenthal, and then the whole season just went away like that, went in the trash. Whereas this year you're kind of like, okay, if somebody gets injured, we got somebody in the minors. Even like Adrian Martinez, Pedro Avila, you could probably even expect them, if people were to get hurt, maybe to make a spot start or two, the way Reese Kinnear did last year. Maybe they won't throw as many innings, but you could expect a spot start. So a lot more depth this year. You can absolutely expect the Padres to be in something at the trade deadline, whether it be for this porous lineup or injuries to the rotation. But keep an eye out for this rotation, man. I think these Zips projections are sleeping on them, because a lot of these guys have done it before, and I think they'll do it again.
I think you guys have forgotten 2 very important left-handed relievers that are in our system. Just because they're injured, I feel like you guys have just sort of, glanced over them. Like, you guys only mentioned Pomeranz and Hill. We mentioned Mortejon, I think in the previous video or in this one, how he was injured, unfortunately. He's coming back off Tommy John. He'll be ready by, I believe, after the first couple months of season. The guy throws 100 miles an hour, has a nasty slider, and throws this weird knuckle changeup that actually gets hitters to miss pretty often. And then we have Jose Castillo, who's finally coming back from injury. He's been throwing bullpens. He's looked great. We saw him in his role. He could be a great setup guy. He could basically go out there anytime. High velocity fastball, absolutely filthy slider. And we only really have Tim Hill as the lefty option this bullpen right now. Adding those two guys with Motorhone having experience as a starter, he can go a couple innings if you need him to be. You add those two guys in there, the bullpen looks a lot different, looks a lot better than it used to. You know, you have multiple guys who can be that setup man. You have Lamet, who could either be a setup man or closer. You have Suarez, who can be a setup man or closer. Motorhone, he can be your multiple inning guy or be a setup man with his stuff. Castillo has experience as a setup man. You get a lot of these guys that are high leverage relievers once they're all back and healthy. Even when Pomeranz is all back and healthy, you have a fairly good amount of balance between righty and lefty, and most of them are going to be very high profile guys when it comes to relievers. So you can even say the Padres had the best bullpen last year. That bullpen look like mediocre compared to the talent that's on this team right now. I know that's very high of me saying that, but I truly believe that.
I mean, we see all the talent here. Like, you see all the talent with the pitchers. You see just absolutely ridiculous pitches. You brought up Motorhone. Dude, that's a guy that I'm not even thinking about right now. And Motorhone still could have an amazing career. I don't think that he should ever be a starter. We've talked about him not being a starter. We've advocated for Dinelson Lamet to not be a starter anymore. But we've seen like what those guys are able to do when they get on and when they're pitching well. And hitters don't have a chance against them. Like Dinelson Lamet in 2020 was absurd. Motorhone has a chance to be a very, very good reliever, and he can pitch in a lot of interesting situations too. Actually, kind of similar to Drew Pomeranz, just because if you guys remember when the Padres acquired Drew, he would bounce around. He'd pitch in like the seventh inning some games. Sometimes he'd close. He just kind of pitch whenever. And the whole point was they want him to come up, they want him to come in when the other team's heart of their lineup was up, and that's whenever he'd come out. So I think you're going to see a lot more of like matchup based, like pitching substitutes where you're going to have guys come in. Okay, we want Tim Hill against these couple guys. Not, hey, why don't we bring in Tim Hill like to start this inning when there's already's up? Oh, he walked two guys? It's Tim Hill's bread and butter of let's get out of like the most insane jam ever. Let's pull him now and let's bring in Pagan. Oh, Pagan let up a 3-run home run. Look at that. And that was just like all that happened in the second half of the Padres season last year. I don't expect the type of like mismanagement with the bullpen from someone like Bob Melvin, from Ruben Niebla. And I think we also look at this whole staff and we go, I think one guy that's kind of like a good indicator to see of like what's to come is Mackenzie Gore. We haven't really talked about him that much today. We've talked about him in the past a bunch, but look at Mackenzie Gore, like how he's looked and how he's been talked about this offseason compared to the last two with Larry Rothschild. Because it's like, what's wrong with Mackenzie Gore? Does this guy suck? And now it's like, oh, Mackenzie Gore is going to be the ace. We're all confident in that again. That's crazy. That's crazy that it jumps that quickly from, hey, Ruben, can you work with this guy's mechanics? Oh, yeah. Oh, that velocity problem where he was throwing 89. He's actually throwing 99 now. Like, that's a big deal. So I think that's probably the biggest difference to me is, and it is a huge difference when you look at the starters in terms of the depth that was completely absent last year. And now you have, I would say, 7 capable guys. And then you have like 4 guys that you can call up from the minor leagues that I don't know if you want them pitching for a bunch of starts, but you might throw them in for a start or two and you feel confident with them, coming out a couple times. But coaching is going to make a huge difference in this team. And I think that you're going to mostly see that with the pitching rotation. Padres if they're going to win games, they're going to have to win a lot of 2-1 games, 3-2 games. That's what's going to have to happen, especially early on in the year without Fernando playing. So hopefully we're right. I mean, I definitely hope we're right, because if we're not, this team is going to get slaughtered early on. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. So thank you guys for listening. I said before, we're not going to be as positive about the lineup. Tomorrow's episode is going to be a lot more of like, thank you, AJ Preller, for constructing the most random group of players. Let's just have 2 outfielders and 4 catchers. Screw it. But yeah, okay, that's going to do it for today's episode, guys. Pitcher rotation is going to ball out this year. You guys heard it here first. I know a lot of people are not high on it. we are very high on it. We wanted to get that out here. Really pumped about what this rotation looks like this year, and what this menacing starting rotation can look like if they're healthy. And it seems like that is on the forefront. So we're super pumped for that. But thank you guys for listening, and that's going to do it for today's episode.